BBOR Black Box Online Radio, coming to you from West Virginia at heart and from around the globe. And hello, Nedheads. Hello, Black Box Battalion. Today is Monday, another Zodiac Monday. Okay, today is not Monday, it is Tuesday. Welcome to this special bonus episode of the Zodiac Killer News Report. And I was talking to you guys yesterday during one of the posts here on BBOR about how there was enough material for a second Zodiac Killer News Report, and also I've been doing an ongoing discussion where I've been looking at Mike Morford's new podcast on Zodiac Speaking, which was about 2.5 hours long, and I covered it on the last two Zodiac Mondays, and I also thought that I didn't want to make you guys wait an entire week just to get to the third part. And the final reason for this one is, this is something that I've wanted to do for quite some time. As you can see from the title of this episode, this is the Zodiac Killer News Report, Dark Psychology Edition. So there are going to be some psychological explorations that we're going to do about the Zodiac Killer in this episode. But first, you guys know the drill. You can hit the like button if you want, subscribe if you haven't, and drop a comment down below if you have something to say about the Zodiac Killer. For larger things, you can send them to me at blackboxonlineradio at AOL.com. And I am your host, Box Ned. Before we do anything else, I want to play a clip from the channel Bad Things True Crime, and then we'll respond to it because they're going to ask a question that will be incorporated into the dark psychology discussions. So if you're listening to this on Apple Podcasts or Spotify or iHeartRadio, where anybody can download the show for free under the names Black Box True Crime or Black Box Podcast, I hope that you'll check out the YouTube version with the images on the screen at some point. But let's just have an intro from Bad Things True Crime.
Dennis Rader, David Berkowitz, Keith Jesperson, and the infamous Zodiac have in common, other than being depraved serial killers, that is. These and many other killers were attention seekers, writing letters to police departments and newspapers, bragging about or giving up information that wasn't public knowledge, in a sick and egotistical game of cat and mouse with those trying to catch them. Times and technology have changed since these killers were on their murderous rampages. This doesn't mean that today's killers don't always stay in the shadows.
And once again, that was from the channel Bad Things True Crime. Now, firstly, it's an excellent challenge question. What do these serial killers have in common? BTK Dennis Rader, David Berkowitz, Keith Jesperson, and the Zodiac Killer. But again, as you may have noticed in that video, that wasn't the Zodiac Killer. That was a picture of a man named Gary Francis Post, the suspect of the Casebreakers, amongst others. And I'm actually very disappointed that a channel like Bad Things True Crime would share that photo. I was about to say post that photo, but that would not be appropriate. And the reason why is, this is a true crime channel that I've followed for quite some time, and on a recent episode, I just congratulated them for reaching their 100,000 subscriber mark. I was even telling my fiancé that, you know what, I think it's finally time that I buy some of that Bad Things True Crime merchandise. I don't know why, but for some reason, I want to drink my coffee out of a mug that says Bad Things on it. However, they're going to do something like that? That is almost unacceptable because, as I said, I've followed this channel for years, and I can tell by their other episodes that they know better. The people who run that channel know that that is not the Zodiac Killer. That is just somebody that was accused by a group of individuals called the Casebreakers, and again, amongst others, such as Dale Julin, a TV broadcaster who happened upon this information from an individual named Chris Avery. He wrote all about this in his book, Catching Zodiac, but this all relates to a statement that was made by the Casebreakers about how they had identified the Zodiac Killer, and they have not. That is not something that the FBI ever signed off on, and I'm really surprised that a channel like Bad Things True Crime would continue to perpetuate this type of misinformation about how Gary Francis Post was the Zodiac Killer. They've discussed this very clearly in their other videos about how it's just an allegation. But there it is, all the same, from a video that came out about 2 weeks ago in the year 2025. And before we get to some of the psychological talk, I want to do some follow-ups from yesterday's Zodiac Monday. And the first is going to relate to an ongoing discussion that we've been having about the Zodiac Killer's shoe size. And that is that, did the Zodiac Killer wear a size 10 and a half shoe? And the reason why is because on September 27th of 1969, the Zodiac Killer approached Brian Hartnell and Cecilia Shepard at Lake Berryessa. He was wearing his hooded costume. He was carrying a firearm, which was most likely a .45 caliber firearm, based on matching the description to certain pictures that were identified by Brian Hartnell. He said that he thought the .45 was the most similar. He carried a knife, pre-cut lengths of rope. He tied up Brian and Cecilia and stabbed them, and then wrote a message on the car door. But this became a very, very clear example of when they found a set of footprints that was almost certainly from the killer, that had to have been from the killer, because it went from the picnic blanket where Brian and Cecilia were back to Brian Hartnell's car, and the killer knelt down and wrote the message, a single set of footprints. So there has been some challenges that have been proposed lately about how maybe the Zodiac Killer did not actually have a size 10 and a half shoe that has been shared in almost every single Zodiac Killer discussion. The Zodiac wore size 10 and a half wing walkers at Lake Berryessa. And Adam Ivester of the channel Real Zodiac Killer Revealed has proposed that the Zodiac actually wore a size 17 shoe, because there is a just photograph of this and a report of this where it states that the measurements of the shoe were 13 inches. And because they were 13 inches, if you go to a shoe size calculator, which you can find online, I've done this myself, a shoe that is 13 inches should be size 17, not size 10 and a half. And when I looked at the photo yesterday on Zodiac Monday, I was saying that, well, clearly this shoe print is not 13 inches. Firstly, the metal part of the tape measure doesn't start at the beginning, and the number 13 isn't even featured in the photo. It's much less than that. And somebody responded by saying, Ned, clearly you have not looked at the bottom of wing walkers. And, I mean, there is a 1-inch flat mark that goes around the tread. So the bottom sole of a wing walker shoe is going to have a space that is not going to have those lined sections of tread. And to answer the question, have I looked at the bottoms of wing walkers before? Yes, there's actually a very clear graphic of that on ZodiacKillerFacts.com. But did I remember about the 1-inch flat tread that surrounds the ridge tread, or I should just say flat space that surrounds the tread on the bottom of the wing walker? No, I did not. And I'm sharing this to demonstrate that I was wrong, and I admit it. But I wanted to get to the bottom of this, like seriously, thinking about how and why this could actually account for some type of discrepancy, or what was the Zodiac Killer's real shoe size, and what on earth would be going on with this type of 10 and a half versus size 15 versus size 17 shoe print that's found at Lake Berryessa. What shoe did the Zodiac Killer really wear? So I went online, just, searching the usual sites like anybody else, and I found a discussion on Tappa Talk that may provide a little bit of clarity, and that is that when shoes are measured, they are measured in two ways. There is the outside measurement, or the external measurement, and then there is the inside of the shoe that can also be measured. And with the wing walker, there can be some of the rubber sole that is going to extend outward a little bit, but mostly the wing walkers can also contain a steel toe, which is going to add length to the shoe. So somebody who would wear a size 10 and a half would have a shoe that is somewhat longer than a standard 10 and a half size shoe. But also we have to remember internal measurements versus external measurements. And I'm just going to throw this out to the listeners of Black Box Online Radio. This isn't from me. This is from forensic scientists who examined and looked at the case. And, it is in the report that the footprint was approximately 13 inches, written by Hal Snook. And, you can even find that. I'll even put it up on the screen here. But do you really think that forensic scientists would be off by 6.5 sizes, that they wouldn't just put in their reports that it was a size 17 shoe if it actually was. We have to remember that they're not trying to share this stuff on the internet. That didn't exist. They are just putting this in their own reports. Why on earth would they hold back some type of information like that? Are they just copying and pasting things because of laziness and incompetence? I don't think so. I mean, this would also be a challenge to anybody who thinks that the Zodiac Killer wore a size 17 shoe. What report states that the Zodiac wore a size 17 shoe? Or does maybe just the external measurement of a 10.5 wing walker is a little bit longer than the average measurement of something such as a sneaker? And that's my ultimate concluding thought on that segment. Now, I told you guys that I was going to talk a little bit about the Zodiac Killer suspect McDuff, but because this is the Dark Psychology edition, I want to get to those particular points, and I have to give a shout out to Until Tomorrow 9, who asked me, would I make a bullet point list of all the reasons why they think that suspect McDuff could have been the Zodiac Killer? McDuff's full name was William McDuff Andrew. He is the suspect of Mike Morford, and Mike Morford's actually the person who first brought McDuff on the radar back in 2021. As far as making a bullet point list, I mostly did that on the Zodiac Killer News Report from May 26th of this year, May 26, 2025. So instead of repeating all of that information, I want to zone in on a very particular aspect of this theory, and it relates to incel ideology. Incel means involuntary celibate, and I was listening to Mike Morford's podcast, Zodiac Speaking, where he was detailing all of this info with his co-host Andrew Osborne, and they're talking about how and why they thought McDuff might have been a serial killer. And this relates to incel ideology about somebody who was very frustrated because he was unable to form intimate relationships. He was surrounded by other people who were dating, who were getting married during the ages of 19, 20, 21, 22, and 23, and he was just excluded from all of it, partnered with the fact that his life was not going well, unable to hold down a job, unable to secure educational opportunities. And this leads to a type of rage that some people will export and other people will import, and in more technical profiling terms, internalizing the rage. And sometimes we have those moments where we have a million things that we have to do in a day, but then you think, you know what, just one more true crime program. And I decided to just click on the recommended video that I could not resist, which was actually an interview with the therapist and author P. Siobhan Scott, who is also known as Siobhan Scott, and she is the author of the book The Minds of Mass Killers. So let's talk about some of these psychological markers that might indicate whether or not the Zodiac Killer was an incel, whether your suspect is William McDuff Andrew or not. I mean, this would be relevant to anybody who thinks that the Zodiac Killer was somebody who felt that he was denied intimacy, that he was denied a type of opportunity for romantic partnership, or just perhaps denied love, even though I don't think the serial killer would phrase it exactly like that. So I'm watching this interview. This was on the channel Hidden Killers with Tony Bruschi, and one thing that came up was, what a serial killer can do is they can develop this type of insecurity, and they want to overcome the insecurity by putting on a facade. It's almost as if they are going to genuinely overcome the insecurity by just pretending to be the ordinary nice guy, the friendly guy, the nicest guy in the world, the harmless guy, the non-threatening guy. They're going to pretend to be that person. But then, when nobody's paying attention, they are going to do very, very destructive things, because they are dealing with a certain type of rage that comes from non-acceptance. And it gets to the point where actually they no longer have the insecurity, because they have this caricature, they have this persona that they have created, and that is where the confidence goes. It's like they're just going about their daily life, smiling at people and being nice in the workplace, and because they are thinking, what do these people know? I'm actually a serial killer. I'm actually strong and powerful, and I can get caught. I can do this without getting caught, and even if I did get caught, I wouldn't care. Because this is another thing that came up in Siobhan Scott's interview, because she's pointing out that sometimes a serial killer will not care if they get caught because they're just on for the ride. They are just going about these activities and they just want to see what happens. It's almost like it's all just a giant game to them. It's almost like it's just a choose your own adventure. It's just an experience for them. And they're putting themselves in these situations that are very risky, and they want to heighten the risk to make things more and more thrilling, purely for the sake of their own enjoyment. And it all comes back to this concept of rejection, feeling that they are just inadequate. And this is from a different source. It was actually on an episode of Radio Reddit once, when someone said that at a certain point the desire for love is just ceasing to exist, and that just turns to white, silent rage. Absolutely, that's something that I think would be very present in these serial killers, and I completely follow everything that was in this discussion, again, from Siobhan Scott, author of The Minds of Mass Killers. But I just want to point out some things that early on in the game, I learned that these statements are very interpretive. Not everyone is in complete agreement with this concept of how somebody overcomes the insecurity. Because I would say from about 2019 to 2024, was very, very heavily invested in just the concept of self-help psychology, not even from the true crime perspective with a criminal perspective, but when you look at how people are trying to analyze their own behaviors, insecurity can manifest itself in the body in different ways, where it starts to affect somebody's mannerisms, body language, tone of voice, all of that. And then that can affect things in their daily life. So even if they are not going to show it externally, they're going to learn how to put on this type of facade, they can still conceal the insecure feelings, and they can still be there. The second thing that I even heard before that, well before 2019, was that there is narcissism. And with narcissists, there's just a very, very abstract sense that is related to insecurity. And that is that the person who is labeled as a narcissist might have a confidence level that is so high that it is a mental disorder. They think so highly of themselves that they actually have a mental and psychological disorder where they just think that they're infallible. They think that they are beyond all forms of humanity, that they're superior to everyone. And some people think that that is purely a facade for insecurity, and other people think a little bit more to what was discussed by Siobhan Scott about how, no, they've actually overcome the insecurity to the point where they just exported all of their self-worth into this persona that they've created. Let's say something like the Zodiac Killer. And then they're using this as a way to just rebuild their fractured life, their rejected life. What do you guys think of this? Do you think the Zodiac Killer was dealing with this type of incel ideology? You guys have said this in the chat before, that you think the Zodiac Killer was the original incel. Do you think that the Zodiac was somebody who was a younger person? Let's say age 23, 24, like William McDuff Andrew, who felt that he was denied the opportunities to have relationships, who felt like his life was falling apart. And some of the other things that were discussed on Zodiac Speaking were, could someone who was 23 or 24 really create letters and ciphers like the Zodiac Killer? I mean, absolutely yes, I would say. I don't think there's anything that would stop somebody from writing as frequently as the Zodiac did if they were 23 or 24. Now, I've said before that I think that the tone of voice in the Zodiac's letters suggests that it's somebody older, but a 23 or 24-year-old definitely could have been aware of everything that the Zodiac is using. I'm looking at some different types of markers, but what do you guys think? What do you guys think about how there could be this type of incel ideology, specifically with a suspect like William McDuff Andrew? Do you think that that could have been incorporated into this desire to create the Zodiac's persona? Now, the next thing, in terms of the Dark Psychology edition, is relevant to a book that was recommended to me by Sonnet Daymont, and it's called Psychopath Free. Sana Damont is a therapist who was a guest on this program, and she was talking all about her Zodiac Killer suspect, Robert Christian Hansen. And during the interview, she recommended two books, The Sociopath Next Door, which I've read, and I have a true crime book discussion about that here on Black Box Online Radio, which I invite everybody to listen to. And also, she recommended a book called Psychopath Free by Jackson Mackenzie, and that's one that I haven't read yet. So I decided to flip through it, if you will, and there's one thing that stood out to me about how psychopaths would function, and I want you to keep this in mind in relation to the Zodiac Killer, and that is that sometimes a psychopath will spin a web of lies because they want to have power over the people that they're lying to, and that's a rather simple and easy thing to understand. But sometimes the lies are very weak, they are very obvious, and it's almost as if the person who is lying wants to get caught in the lie, or they don't care if they get caught in the lie. Now, why would they share the information like that? Because they want to demonstrate that they are immune to the emotions of the person who is unraveling the lies. What would be an example of this in the Zodiac Killer world? I think one of them would very clearly be the concept of slaves in the afterlife. When Zodiac's writing in the 408 cipher that he says, I like killing people because it's so much fun. It's more fun than hunting wild game in the forest because man is the most dangerous animal of all. To kill is the most thrilling experience. It's even better than getting your rocks off with a girl. When I die, I will be reborn in paradise and those whom I have killed will be my slaves. That stuff. Like, say, for example, the Zodiac is saying something that I think is completely untrue. I don't think he believed any of that. I think that that is someone who is providing a bogus reason why he's killing. And it's so blatantly obvious that the person who's creating this persona doesn't actually think that. It's just he's saying something really dumb, and he knows that a lot of people are going to believe it and think that he means it wholeheartedly. That's one. But what is an even better example of how the Zodiac Killer would tell a lie that is blatantly and obviously a lie just to pull one over on people? How about saying that when you solve the ciphers you will have my identity? And two of the Zodiac Killer ciphers have been solved, the Z408 and the Z340, and they said nothing about his identity, about his name, or any clues to his identity or his name, to the best of our knowledge. So then I think that this is just an example of he lied, he gets caught in the lie, and then he's just like, whatever, I don't care. I mean, he's doing this to show that he's making other people play his game. And I think that this is just something that was shared in all of the sources that I've been talking about, whether it's Zodiac speaking, or Siobhan Scott, or Jackson Mackenzie, when they're saying that it's as if this person wants to play a twisted and demented cat and mouse game. Even Bad Things True Crime was talking about this. It's creating a twisted and demented cat and mouse game. But if the person, the psychopathic serial killer, is the one who is orchestrating the game, then they get to cheat. They get to break the rules. They get to send people on this ridiculous wild goose chase of trying to solve my ciphers, of trying to spread this ridiculous nonsensical ideology about slaves in paradise, and it's all just made up. They're just poking at people. They're just doing things, putting a set of events into action and seeing what happens. And you will find this time and time again with psychopaths, putting a set of events into action to see what happens. It's almost like a giant social experiment. And this is laid out in the book, The Sociopath Next Door, about how the psychopath just wants to watch the chaos unfold after he or she has committed an action. It doesn't even have to be a murderous action, just any action, period. Even something like a robbery, and sitting back and waiting for the police to show up. I kid thee not. So with the Zodiac, I'm noticing all of these things that are suggesting that the Zodiac is a narcissist, 110%, and most likely a psychopath as well. But I have another thing that I would like to share with you guys. And this is a statement from the serial killer Joel Rifkin. I'm going to play a clip that's about 40 seconds long, And Joel Rifkin is going to talk about the thought process that a serial killer experiences after the first crime, after the second crime, and after the third crime. And this is very important when we're looking at the activities and thought patterns of the Zodiac Killer, because the Zodiac Killer only had 4 confirmed nights of activity: the Lake Herman Road murders, the Blue Rock Springs shooting, the Lake Berryessa stabbing, and the murder of Paul Stein, the taxi driver. So, I'm going to play this clip, then let's talk about it.
One night they'd be fine. The next night I could be with another 2, 3. The first 2 would be fine. The third one wouldn't be. Why her and not the other 5? I still don't understand.
Something comes over you.
And there's also, you lie to yourself while you're doing this. That's the other thing. You do one, and well, they can only kill you the first time for the one, so the second one becomes like a free one. Well, so then you can rationalize the third one. Back and forth, back and forth.
Did you ever vow to stop?
Oh, like 100 times. It's the same as quitting smoking. Yeah, I'll do that tomorrow. Oop, tomorrow I'm smoking. I'll quit again. Yep.
And one more time, those were the words of the serial killer Joel Rifkin. So my first immediate response to this is that this is something that suggests to me that maybe the Lake Herman Road murders were indeed the Zodiac Killer's first crime or first set of crimes. Now, what would be the rationale for this? Committing the first crime, and then there's the 7-month gap from the Lake Herman Road murders to the Blue Rock Springs shooting, where, think about what he was saying in that clip about how he wants, or he's committed one crime, and then if he commits the second crime, he can only be convicted once. He's only going to get sent to jail once. He's only going to get the life sentence once. He's only going to get the gas chamber one time. So by committing the second crime, it's almost like he definitely got away with one, and that is some very demented type. That's a very demented type of thinking. And overall, though, I want to kind of answer the challenge question that he proposed. When you heard that thing about why is it that he would go out with some women and he wouldn't do anything to them, but he would go out with other women, and maybe the 5th person that he was with, she was the one that he decided to murder, and he still doesn't understand why? I'm going to try to answer something like that, and this is just a superficial take on the subject from an uninformed individual like me who is just trying to connect the dots. I'm not a criminologist or a psychologist. I am just an observer. How about this? Urges. Because one thing that I also learned very early on about serial killers is they have urges to kill. They have urges to commit these actions. But not everybody has urges continuously, and please, please don't think I'm making light of the situation at all, but it's like when somebody is hungry and then they want to eat, but you're not going to be hungry 24 hours a day unless you have that one medical condition that makes you want to eat all the time. And even some people have urges for sex, but they don't necessarily have that urge all the time. So a serial killer is going to have this type of urge to kill or to inflict harm on people. But much as he said, he could be with one girl, 2 or 3 or 4, and the 5th one is the one that gets murdered because he just had the urge at that exact moment. That's a sexually motivated serial killer who is driven by these types of urges to commit homicide, homicidal tendencies. But I don't think they're just consistently present all the time inside a psychopath. I think that they come out at certain times. And then there are going to be serial killers like the Zodiac Killer who are going to be a little bit more calculating. And another thing, though, that was discussed by Siobhan Scott that is very important to bring up is that serial killers can use certain pieces of information as blueprints or models, or they can learn methods from the media and also from fictional sources like movies. And with the Zodiac Killer, not only movies, but also perhaps books and comic books and magazines. The Zodiac was very apparently into those things. And what Siobhan Scott said was that A psychopathic serial killer will tend to obsessively watch a film that shows depictions of murder and violence. And it's not like they just watch it one time and they remember it. No, they're going to regularly watch that thing over and over again, specifically if it features somebody targeting the type of victim that the serial killer wants to target, because they find that stimulating. And she even used the term sexual arousal, but she really wanted to clarify that it's sexual arousal that doesn't have to be connected to the actual acts of sexual intercourse or something similar. Not about physicality, but just about how someone experiences that type of internal stimulation when they're seeing these crimes take place. I think a very clear example of that would be Dr. Zodiac and Charlie Chan at Treasure Island, where at first you have this serial killer named Zodiac who's mailing letters, and they call him Zodiac in the film. Then ultimately he's revealed as Dr. Zodiac at Charlie Chan and Treasure Island, and that might be something that the Zodiac Killer really, really did watch over and over again and start to try and emulate from. But this just goes to show that it is something that turns into some type of obsession. Now, maybe your suspect is William McDuff Andrew. Maybe your suspect is somebody who was completely different, who was married with children. But I think that the types of arousal and stimulation and internalized rage would be relevant to absolutely all Zodiac Killer suspects, with the exception of the hoax theory, or some type of multiple killer theory like involving the CIA and so on. Those things would be done for more of a deliberate and calculating reason. But I'd love to know what you guys think about any of the things that I've talked about in regards to the dark psychology of the Zodiac Killer. And I'd like to move on with a discussion about the SLA letter. This is one that was discussed in 1974. Discussed in 1974. Yeah, it was discussed in 1974, but it was also mentioned in 1974. A letter appeared that does not have the line, "This is the Zodiac speaking." It is an unconfirmed communication, but it talks about how the letters SLA are pronounced slay, and they're an Old Norse word meaning kill. SLA stands for Symbionese Liberation Army. And on the Zodiac Speaking podcast, they were looking at how and why the Zodiac may have chosen to write the 1974 SLA letter. And a reason for that could have been that the SLA was responsible for the kidnapping of Patty Hearst, and she was the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst, and that it's possible that she may have been an active participant the entire time, but she definitely develops a type of Stockholm Syndrome at some point with the assailants, and it's a very, very bizarre and intricate story. I'm going to have to do a much larger feature on it for Black Box Online Radio, but as far as this goes, could the Zodiac Killer have been intimidated by anybody else getting some type of news coverage instead of him? Or could this just have pulled the Zodiac out of the woodworks and into the open because he wanted to say something that would also get him back in the picture? And that's a really interesting hypothesis, and it's one that's been discussed before. And again, this doesn't have to be exclusively related to a suspect like William McDuff Andrew or any suspect. Could the Zodiac have tried to do that because he wanted people to still remember him to a certain extent? Bear in mind that in 1974, it appears that the Zodiac is not using the line, "This is the Zodiac speaking," not on any of the majorly considered 1974 letters: the Exorcist letter, the SLA letter, the Badlands card, and the Count Markov letter. So this is also something that I think there's a fair amount of possibility for that. But I do have to point something out, that I was reading an article on a recent Zodiac Killer News Report that said that Patty Hearst was the daughter of a senator, and I knew that that wasn't true. I mean, she was the granddaughter of William Randolph Hearst, and a lot of you guys were keen to pick that up in the comment section, and I don't know why that slipped out of my mind for a second. And what I think the person who wrote that article was thinking about was there was a connection between the Zodiac Killer and the murder of a senator's daughter, and her name was Valerie Percy. And she is the subject of the book Sympathy Vote by Glenn Wall, and he has a suspect in the murder of Valerie Percy named William Thorson. And William Thorson, he believes, went on to become the Zodiac Killer, and then he wrote a book about the Zodiac as well called Zodiac Maniac. And let's just say it's a little bit far out, but that is perhaps what that person was thinking of. Maybe they were conflating Patty Hearst with Valerie Percy, and I digress from that. And the final thing that I heard on Zodiac speaking that I would discuss with you guys is something that was actually proposed by Andrew Osborne, and that was after the SLA letter, we have the Badlands card, and then we have the Count Marco letter. And could the Count Marco letter have been created by the Zodiac with intentionally different handwriting? I mean, I've said this many times that if any of the unconfirmed communications are from the killer, it could be the SLA letter, the Badlands card, and the Count Marco letter. But I do admit that the Count Marco letter has a different style of handwriting. Now, could this have been the Zodiac trying to see if people would still figure out or still be able to certify the letter, even if he had disguised his handwriting? And I'm going to turn that one over to you guys. I'm really about 50-50 on that because one possibility for the Count Marco letter is it could have been a hoaxer. Another possibility is that someone was adding the almost elongated lines on the Count Marco letter to be somewhat silly because it's all about making a mockery of Marco Spinelli, the person who wrote this Count Marco column, and it's even signed Red Phantom, Red with Rage, which is not exactly making a mockery, but it's definitely something that is out of the ordinary for the Zodiac. The Zodiac certainly didn't refer to himself as the Red Phantom regularly, or let's be clear, the Phantom, who happens to be red, regularly. So what do you think about that? Do you think the Zodiac Killer was trying to disguise his handwriting and see if people would still be able to certify that it was him? Just testing the waters. Now, if I make my handwriting extremely different, are they going to know 100% whether or not it's my letter? And to answer that question, no, I would still say that the Count Marco letter is still an unconfirmed communication. But right now I would like to just make the announcement that if you like listening to Zodiac Monday as well as Zodiac Tuesday with the Zodiac Killer News Reports, then you can support this channel with buymeacoffee.com, buymeacoffee.com/blackboxonlineradio. That allows you to make a donation or contribution to help the show, and anybody who makes a donation will get a shout out on Zodiac Monday. And another final reason why I chose to make a second Zodiac Killer News Report this week was I told you guys that I had some things that I wanted to discuss with you, and I polled you and asked, would you like to hear a second Zodiac Killer News Report? And overwhelmingly, you guys voted for yes. So thank you to all of you people who want to listen to Zodiac Monday and the Zodiac Killer News Report and all of the shows here on Black Box Online Radio. And I would like to give another big shout out to Dennis G. Dennis G helps find a lot of the images for Black Box Online Radio that you see going by on the screen here. And Dennis has also shared one with me when he asked the question, could the Zodiac symbol have been chosen because the Zodiac worked in the film theater business? That's a challenge question. He's provided these images as well. And I would say that, well, if your suspect is Rick Marshall, then that would fit in very, very nicely. Rick Marshall was a projectionist. He worked at a silent film theater, and he was someone who actually becomes a rather widely discussed Zodiac Killer suspect. I don't talk about Rick Marshall too frequently here on this channel, but if he were indeed the Zodiac, yes, I would think that would be an inspiration, someone who's looking at that symbol all day. And there are also other Zodiac suspects who have worked in the world of cinema. One of them would be Richard Gaikowski, but as I understand, Richard Gaikowski didn't start working in the movie theater business until the 1970s. He was perhaps involved with film earlier than that, but of course the Zodiac chose his symbol in the 1960s. Before Gaikowski would have been working at the theater, he would have been working at the Good Times newspaper, actually, in the 1960s. But, thank you so much to Dennis for helping out with the images for Black Box Online Radio here. And moving onward, we have an article that came out in the Yahoo News that was actually about the Zodiac Killer, and it's a rather generic Zodiac Killer article that just says, who is the Zodiac Killer? Murderer's identity never found, but suspects remain. And this was written by Anna Kaufman, just citing the source. Decades after the Zodiac Killer committed his crimes, The Zodiac remains a fixture in American true crime culture. Seldom has a cold case been kept so warm by public interest. Since the notorious murderer struck terror throughout the Northern California Bay Area in the late 1960s, countless books, podcasts, and even blockbuster films have been inspired by the unsolved case. So who was the Zodiac Killer really? A depraved figure who took the life of at least 5 people, eluded the authorities for decades. He gained notoriety for the taunting letters and ciphers he sent to local newspapers. And I think that just ties in to everything in this dark psychology episode. This was somebody who wanted to gain notoriety, no matter what the reason, no matter what your theory is, hoax theory, CIA theory, lone killer theory. This is somebody who wanted to get notoriety. He wanted to hide his own insecurities. He wanted to project a form of fabricated confidence onto the Zodiac Killer's persona. Who was the Zodiac Killer? The Zodiac Killer is a famed serial murderer whose crimes haunted the northern coast of California in the late 1960s. The Zodiac Killer is well known for the cryptic messages he sent to the news media, taunting law enforcement and reporters alike with ciphers and graphic descriptions of his crimes. There are 5 murders connected to the Zodiac Killer, although he claimed in communications he had killed as many as 37 people. His confirmed victims were David Arthur Faraday, Betty Lou Jensen, Cecilia Ann Shepard, Paul Stein, and Darlene Elizabeth Farron. The Zodiac was known to target couples, attacking 3 separate young pairs in his killing spree, although 2 of the male victims survived. Now this is actually going to be some form of counterbalance. I mean, a lot of people are going to look at the Zodiac attacking couples to say that he had some type of animosity toward heterosexual romance. This is the incel ideology. And even though I said some very, very strong points in favor of that during the dark psychology segments, you really can't read too much into that, because it really could just be an opportunistic murderer. Somebody who's setting out to kill, somebody who has made the decision that they want to commit murder, somebody who has these types of homicidal tendencies. And this all goes back to the discussions from Siobhan Scott when she's saying that we don't necessarily know why serial killers just have this ability and desire and choice to go out and just kill. We're not even talking about urges at this point, about why somebody, instead of just letting their frustrations out in a different way, wants to go out and kill. And I think it all relates to genetics, like a genetic predisposition to murder, neurological functioning, like stimulation in the brain. And also, I did mean that in all seriousness, that I thought that some serial killers have urges for murder, the way that some people have urges to eat and urges for sex. And I am not making light of that at all. So really, this could just be the work of an opportunistic serial killer. Though the Zodiac was never caught and the official investigation remains open, public interest has remained high. Countless theories have gained traction over the years and pointed the finger at various men who share physical markers or specific interests with the famed killer. See, this thing about the specific interests, it makes for some interesting discussions. It makes for some fair and reasonable analysis in regards to suspect profiling, but at the end of the day, people will hunker down on this way too intensely. People will zone in on this stuff way too powerfully. And I do mean that, because they're going to be like, well, you know, my suspect liked comic books. My suspect liked detective magazines. My suspect liked the theater. And that can stand as part of a complete profile. But if that's just a standalone segment, if that is just something that someone is offering as a core element of their theory, that your suspect had common interests as that of the Zodiac Killer, I have common interests as that of the Zodiac Killer, you have common interests as that of the Zodiac Killer. You need more than just common interests, and that should not be the driving force of any suspect profile. Now, the next question here, proposed by the wonderful Yahoo News, is, why do we still care? And Dr. Harold Schechter actually has an answer. It's the mythology of him, says Dr. Harold Schechter, a literature professor who also specializes in serial killers. He sent letters to the press is only part of it. It's not unusual, going back to Jack the Ripper, for serial killers to write taunting letters to the press and authorities, Schechter explained, adding that it feeds their megalomania. All right, so this goes into the challenge question that was proposed by Bad Thanks True Crime. at the beginning of the episode, finally coming full circle. Why would they mail in letters? And no, not you, Gary Francis Post. You could barely write anyway. Rest in peace. I do mean that. And it's that it fuels their megalomania. So, but let's answer this question. Why do we still care? Well, for you and I, who are you guys listening to this right now, I think all of you want to know the truth. You are perhaps invested to a certain point where you want to know who the real killer was. Secondarily, justice has never been served. And also, some people do believe that they can actually crack the case. And it's not just a problem-solving exercise. They genuinely think that they have the ability to solve the Zodiac Killer mystery. And also, it's an unfinished story. It's an unsolved mystery, and if a mystery is unsolved, people are going to try to solve it. I mean, you have people who get involved in all kinds of mysteries. On this channel, I talk about Jack the Ripper and D.B. Cooper mostly, as well as the Zodiac, but there are people who are heavily invested in the search for Amelia Earhart. There are people who are heavily invested in the disappearance of Maura Murray. There are people who are heavily invested in the disappearance of Kyron Horman. They want to solve the case. They want to bring justice. They want closure. They want to share closure with the world. But there are definitely people who do enjoy the process in trying to analyze the facts and so on. But the mythology, I mean, there are lots of serial killer cases. So when he says mythology, I don't know if you should use the word mythology for an ongoing serial killer investigation. Maybe he means the symbology of everything, the Zodiac's cross circle sign off, the Lake Berryessa hood, the images that he has created, visual imagery in his letters, Slaves in Paradise, the physical images that he created and shared in the greeting cards, because, yes, some of the greeting cards were printed, but he also modified them. So all of those things, it feeds their megalomania. It was the content of the letters and the ciphers that made the Zodiac Killer unique. He created the lore on purpose, Schechter says, wearing a costume in one of his killings and using a particular symbol, dubbing himself the Zodiac. So in short, exactly what I just said, we're in complete agreement. The professor and I are on the same page. Amazing. In general, when a serial killer is on the loose, it taps into the very primitive and almost childlike fears he explains, like the monster in the closet kind of thing. And the Zodiac played into that. There are plenty of serial killers who don't want to be caught, Schechter says, but then there are those whose megalomania feed a sort of desire to be a comic book villain. And I think that this can even get to the point where some individuals are just enjoying the process of being caught, but they don't comprehend the after effects. Say, for example, I've been watching a lot of the interrogation videos that have been uploaded to YouTube, and for a while I watched the JCS criminal psychology channel, but there are just so many of them now that just show the interrogation footage of suspects who have been apprehended, and they're talking to the officers for about sometimes 4 hours. One of them was 16 hours long with multiple breaks. The guy fell asleep a couple times, but ultimately he confessed to the crime, and it's after these 4 hours, 16-hour interrogations, then they just realize, all right, I'm the center of everything, I'm the focus of everything, I'm just going to admit to the crime, and I'm on the ride. We're just going to see what happens. It's the giant social experiment again, and they are the center of everything. This has given them the sense of notoriety and recognition within their own mind. Everybody on the outside world thinks that they're a murderous scumbag, but they think that they're important. In addition, because the Zodiac's identity was never established, a whole cottage industry has birthed out of unearthing it. What was the Zodiac Killer's real name? The true identity of the Zodiac Killer has never been confirmed by law enforcement, though several suspects have been identified over the years. And I think that that's just a very fair thing, but I think that also it really isn't a problem for me about this cottage industry aspect. If people want to write books, that's fine. I'm one of the first people to read them. If people want to charge money for their books, that's fine too. Or if they have something else like a documentary that they're working on, that is totally okay with me, because people can write books about any type of subject, really. I mean, there are people who write books about war stories and history and very, very graphic and violent subjects outside of the true crime world. So just to cut off the concept of serial killers is something that I think would be just not necessary or appropriate in terms of free speech and expression. But that's just my take on the subject. Now, the real rule for that, and the real line that should divide everything, should be as long as the person is being honest, genuine, they genuinely think what they're saying is true, they're actually trying to solve the case. Anybody who is a liar, fraud, or spreading intentional misinformation does not deserve to be part of the discussion, and no one should ever pay money for their material. Back to the article from Yahoo News. In 2022, author Jared Kovac laid out a case against Paul Doer, a naval documents clerk from Fairfield, California, asserting that he was the true Zodiac Killer. Doer, who died in 2007, emerged as the most likely suspect in Kovac's book, How to Find Zodiac. And this is also an opportunity to talk to you guys about Paul Doer, because this week on Black Box Online Radio, I will be releasing an episode this Thursday, my first suspect profile episode on Paul Doer. And yes, I've mentioned him on Zodiac Monday before, but it will be the first suspect profile episode specifically devoted to Paul Doer, and I invite you to check that out. One more time, you can hit the like button and subscribe. And Kovac's theory rests on various shared passions that both Doer and the Zodiac had, and I look forward to sharing more with you this Thursday. When was the last Zodiac killing? The last murder that was confirmed to have been committed by the Zodiac was October 11th of 1969, and I also think that everything that Joel Rifkin said in that episode shares that the Zodiac's last murder was October 11th of 1969. He commits the first crime. Then he commits the second crime because he's like, well, I think that they just have no way to stop me if I can get away with it twice. Or if I got away with it twice, that means one of them I'm going to be completely off the hook for. They can only convict me for life in prison once or the gas chamber once. And then he commits the third one after he's developed this type of persona. He commits the fourth one, the murder of Paul Stein, to see if he is untouchable, to see if he can commit a murder in Presidio Heights just to act like he is some type of larger-than-life figure who can literally walk away from the crime scene past police officers and get away with it. He has proven to himself that he can do this in every way possible, by rope, by knife, by gun, maybe even by fire in the future, but no, I don't even need to complete the Wheel of Death, because he can just do it all in his own mind. He can put the persona into the letters. The whole point was to create the persona in the first place. Alright, I've proven to myself that I'm an infallible murderer. Now I'm just gonna start writing letters and making weird, dumb threats that everybody's gonna believe, because psychopaths tend to tell really ridiculous lies, and they don't care if they're true or false. They don't care if they get exposed for truths or falsehoods, because they can always just pass it off as, yeah, I did lie, and that it was a dumb lie, and you were dumb for believing it. Boom. Such a window into the world of the Zodiac. But I would love to know what you guys think. If you want to challenge me on all of that, please share anything you want in the comments section down below. The San Francisco Chronicle received a letter from the Zodiac claiming responsibility for the murder of Paul Stein and a scrap of Paul Stein's bloody shirt. And that is something that confirmed that the Zodiac was indeed the killer. Why is the Zodiac Killer called the Zodiac? Zodiac was a self-given name, and the notorious serial killer began contacting the press in 1969, sending now-famous ciphers to local newspapers, accompanied by letters to the editor claiming responsibility for various murders, threats, and more. So, have you not heard enough about how this person wanted to remove the insecurities in their own life by creating a persona that was filled with confidence, and then actually escaping the insecurity by acting out the confident persona of the Zodiac? There we go. He gave himself the name. He didn't only want to be a serial killer. He wanted to be a serial killer with an image, with a brand, and above and beyond. Is the Zodiac Killer still alive? Since the Zodiac Killer has never been officially identified, it can't be said for certain if they are still alive. Well, you know what, Yahoo News? I'll give you credit. That's the news story of a lifetime. Is the Zodiac Killer still alive? We don't know. I'm glad you wrote it all out here. How old would the Zodiac Killer be today? Much like whether or not the Zodiac is still alive, the true age of the killer cannot be determined. Alright, Yahoo, you guys have had enough, because you're just messing around at that point. We don't know who the Zodiac was, we don't know how old the Zodiac was, and at the time of this recording, 2025, we don't know whether or not the Zodiac Killer is still alive. But what do you guys think about anything that was discussed in that Yahoo News article? And yes, there are some major points, but what do you think about anything that was discussed in the true crime psychology segment, dark psychology segment? What do you think about the Zodiac Killer suspect stuff? What do you think about the Zodiac's size 17 shoes? Or do you agree with the conventional interpretation of the evidence that the Zodiac wore a 10.5? I'm going with a 10.5, and I'm going to close the door on that subject as well. Nothing else to say about it, and I mean it this time. I know I said it yesterday that I was closing the door on that subject, and I'm back again today, but sometimes that happens. You can have a ban on a subject, and then you can have an unofficial ban on a subject, and then you can have an unofficial ban that doesn't stick. But also, what do you think about the SLA letter? Do you think that the Zodiac wanted to cash in on somebody else's grab for attention and just see what would happen if he started talking about the SLA in regards to the Patty Hearst kidnapping, or the very fact that the SLA was going to be mentioned in the news more? He's like, I'm going to do something to get the attention back into the world of the Zodiac, and really weigh in on these psychological discussions. Thank you so much for listening to this episode, and anybody can write the show at blackboxonlineradio@AOL.com. You can also get me on Facebook. My personal Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and there is also BlackboxNed88 on TikTok and Instagram. And there I release shorts and reels Monday through Friday on Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and Facebook. My Facebook name is Ned DeHaan, and that will be all for me. I'll see you guys tomorrow talking about Jack the Ripper for Ripper Wednesday. Goodbye.